I appreciate them bringing the Halloween spirit because, as I said, I'm having a hard time doing that. I did come up with this thing, this cover, and I want to illustrate the problem that I was having with coming up with a Halloween talk, is that it's drawn from many sources, many backgrounds, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But there's monsters involved, there's saints involved, there's change of seasons involved, and there's, of course, peanut butter kisses, which is a part I like. But anyway, we will talk about that. So where'd this come from? And it's kind of interesting. If you go on Wikipedia and look it up, it's pretty complex, and it's so complex that I just can't go into it all. I'm going to put a link to a talk that a fellow by the name of Randall Carlson gave. I'll put that in our YouTube video underneath when you where the writing is. He gives one of the best descriptions from a cosmic perspective, because the Earth passes, through the asteroid belt twice a year, and we're doing that at this time, and that's why you'll see some of the meteor showers and some of the major impacts we've had have come at this, like in June is time, and then now, and it's just interesting. So he does a good job of tying that together, probably a much better job than I'll do today, because I'm trying to seek some spiritual redemption, some spiritual thing out of it, and I'll do my best here. But some historians believe it can be traced back to ancient Celtic-speaking countries. It was later Christianized, possibly as a church's way of appeasing the pagan audience that it was set on converting. And that's not too unusual. They would grab audiences that were there. They may not have believed anything they were worshiping, but they would somehow change it into something that worked so they could grab their audience. They were early politicians. And other historians say that it originated as a Christian holiday, which is kind of interesting. There's a faction of Christianity that says, no, Halloween is ours. We founded it. But Halloween has been associated with everything from the goddess of fruits and seeds to the festival of the dead, which is the skeletons, all that stuff, to the Celtic festival celebrating the summer's end. And one thing that I think they all share in common is it's a time to party. Any festival that they have, it's an excuse. I don't care what it is. We're celebrating the dead. Okay, let's get drunk. And eat. Let's eat and get drunk. And it's like any excuse to do that. We do it. And so that's the one thing that ties all of them together. And I didn't think that would be a very good topic today. So I'm going to avoid that one. But from a personal standpoint, as a child, I only saw it as an opportunity to disguise myself and hit up the neighborhood for a boatload of free candy. And that was a big deal. I mean, that's all I thought about is when I thought about Halloween, it was all about candy. And then as I grow older, you become an adult, there's a real advantage to that. You don't have to go out and hit the pavement to get the candy. You just go buy it. You can buy bags and bags of candy. You can buy as much as you want and tell your spouse, well, this is for the kids. This is. But I never wanted to give it to the kids because they don't need it. Too much they have too much sugar. And so one year I dug a moat around my house and I rented 14 crocodiles and I put them in that moat to keep the kids out so I could keep my candy. And Beth looked at that. I showed it to her. I was very proud of it. And she said, don't you think that's a bit extreme? And so I thought about it. She's usually right. So I took 2 of the crocodiles back. But I can tell you this year was a lot easier. All I had to do was post a sign on my door that said tested positive. So I got all my candy. They don't need it, little monsters. All right. So I confess that as one involved in a career that encourages people to drop the costume of self-image, learn to master our terrorizing thoughts, and let go of the attitude of give me what I want or else you may not like what I do to you, trick or treat, I find very little of spiritual value in this holiday. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm coming from someone who would like to take a holiday, as we do. You know, all of our holidays, as I have said, they all have a spiritual principle in the background someplace. They rest on something. And I know that Halloween has something there. So, and some of you are laughing because you probably know a lot more about it than I do. But as trying to come up with a positive something to help people, it's just kind of interesting that, you know, we pull out all the scariest stuff we can imagine. People, sometimes families get together and they binge on horror movies, you know, and I've never liked horror movies in the first place. And as I said, you know, the family get-togethers, that might be the first time you have a chance to get together and eat with a mummy, but then a lot of families look like the Munsters anyway, so, you know, it's just not much of a thrill. But anyway, you see I'm really reaching here. So what I've come up with is we can look at Halloween as a way of confronting your worst nightmare, confronting your fears. And in a sense, that's what we do. We bring up, you know, these costumes. They're all scary things that we try to do that and disguise ourselves and all that. So it might be a way to, it can be construed as a formal way of confronting our deepest fears. And we are to learn to be at peace with the thing you fear. So I could kind of go along with that we bring everything out, you know, in the open, that the thing I fear most is, Job says, the thing I fear most has come upon me. That's kind of the celebration of Halloween. You bring up that monster lurking in the shadows of your mind, and you work with it until you bring it into the light and no longer fear it. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Is that something you've never associated with Halloween before? So I hope, you know, maybe we give you a little something extra here for the money. But it's just as a kid, I loved Halloween. I did, and when our kids were growing up, it was even more fun. But I loved it for the wrong reasons. I mean, I didn't know what it was about. It was about dressing up and going out and getting free candy. That's all I knew. And so, you know, why not? So you go out and you hit up every house, and, you know, people back then were very good. And I remember as I was growing out of all of that, and maybe that's not the right way to say it, because some of you never have grown out of all that. As somebody said on Facebook, I think I said that last week, that Halloween's kind of, you know, it's no big deal this year because I've been wearing a mask and eating candy for the last 7 months. So, you know, that's, you know, nothing new. But it's, I like this idea of confronting your fears. I think we all know what that means. You know, we all understand what fear is. And it's a habit. It's a habit for most of us. And it's kind of like static that runs all the time in us if we're not aware of it, if we're not conscious of it. There's so many things that are going on in our life, you know, and then we have this election thing and all that, which adds to some of that noise. But is it possible for us to be able to get past that? Is it possible for us to find a center in ourselves where we actually do experience peace? And this is, I continue to read and study because I'm writing about what is the mainstream Christian message, and how does that differ from what we're talking about here? Because I feel very strongly that Jesus was teaching the truth that we want to know. But I feel also very strongly that the church did not understand what he was teaching. And I ran across a section in a book, a scholarly work on the Gospels. And they even pointed out that the message of Jesus was different from the message of the Gospel writers, from the message of Paul, from the message of John the Baptist. That his message was directed to a kingdom that is already here, something that's already here. And people don't see it. That's what the Gospel of Thomas says. The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. And there's another verse out of Thomas that says the kingdom is within and it is without. And it's that particular gospel, and it's online, you can find it. There's some very strange sayings in it, but the Gnostic believed that there were certain people that had the spark, the divine spark. And that divine spark was God. It was a spark of God. They believed that God was actually a distant entity somewhere out in the universe, but it was shooting these sparks off all the time, and these sparks would fly by, and the earth and the planets they named archons. They were like a dark force. They would grab these sparks and they would encase them in a body, and that body would be then put on the earth and would forget they had that divine spark. But not every bodies on the earth had that spark. Some were just made, some were just created. So the Gnostics saw that as some had it and some didn't. And they were a pretty strong force in the early development of the church, and the church attacked them. Ended up burning everything they could get their hands on, and they just did everything they could to decimate the Christian Gnostics. But they held a view of Jesus that was very different, and that's why they did it, because they attacked him, because it was a view that was different. The view that the Gnostic held of Jesus was that he was the great Redeemer. And you say, well, that's the same view that the mainstream Christian holds. What his job was to remind those people that had the spark, you are divine. Gnostic or gnosis means wisdom. And they encouraged people to go within and to find that spark, but they didn't believe everybody had it. And that's the difference in what I would teach and believe and what other people, what someone like the Gnostics would teach, that everybody has that. But it's very obvious that with a lot of people, it's a totally foreign idea. So I completely understand how the Gnostics would come up with that, would think there were some that had the spark and some that didn't. Because I would say the same thing. There are some people that will never get this type of teaching, as long as we're here, but it doesn't mean they don't have the spark. It doesn't mean they're not divine. It just means that they've been trained to think in a different way. And that's the difference. But so we all have that spark, and what keeps it from coming out? Why does fear override that sometimes, or all the time? And why would I say that? Why would fear override that? Why are we always thinking about our world? Why are we always thinking about the things outside of us, the conditions, the people, and all the stuff? We're kind of trying to keep all that in order. We're doing our best to keep it under control. And there's a great deal of fear that goes with that, because we can't always keep it under control. In fact, I don't know if we ever can. It's one of those things that it's an illusion. We keep trying, but life just happens. That's why it's so important, I think, why Jesus said to, bring your awareness into this now moment. Let tomorrow take care of itself, and, yesterday's past. To become aware of this presence that is here now. Consider the lilies of the field, the birds of the air. The Father takes care of them because they're not living in the future. They're not living in the past. They're not churning away with this static of fear. all the time. Somebody called it the monkey mind, just the busy mind that goes on all the time. And part of the reason that happens is we're trying to manipulate life. We're trying to control things, and we can't control them, and so that scares us. I don't have control of this. It appears I do some days. Things go my way. You pray some prayer, and the answer comes, and you feel like it's all working just fine. But then 5 minutes later, something else pops up, and here comes the fear again. So what is it what is the source of fear? That's the question I think that we would want to get in touch with on a great holiday like Halloween. What is the source of fear? It's the belief that we have no control over peace, our peace of mind. It's the fear that something's going to be taken from us that in truth cannot. It cannot be taken from us. Something of value we're going to lose. Something's going to take it. Something's going to rob us. And so we react to that. And we usually experience the fear in situations where we can't do much about the situation. And so the response is that we feel fear. If we can take action, the more action we can take that is constructive, the more fearless we feel we are. And I'm speaking in pretty general terms because we all grow up with different things, but I know what fear is, and I have thought about it a lot. And I've talked to people that were terrified, and I have, at the end of a conversation, can see that they're no longer terrified. So what happened? I don't have any power to take away anybody's fear, but I can speak in a way that helps put their mind in a certain place where they realize that in truth they have nothing to fear. That we are eternal beings. That's one of the problems I have with Catholic Church. Part of the celebration, they pull out some relic. You know what a relic is? It's like a mummy hand or something that used to belong to a saint. I don't know what that is or what gets somebody off on that, but it's something wrong with that picture in my mind. My mind has never gone to places like that. That never seems like a solution to me, and I don't know all the stuff behind it. There probably is some great metaphysical principle that I would totally agree with, but you just see this stuff. These relics are very important. It's like that's a sacred thing. Well, is it? It could be anybody's hand. It could be who knows where it came from. A mummy's hand is a mummy's hand. It's like or the Shroud of Turin. It's like, is that authentic or is it not? I don't care if it is. It's interesting. And even if it's a fake, which I believe it probably is, because scientists have done tests and stuff like that, and they come up with a much later date, but it's a piece of art, certainly. It's something that, people have a real hard time figuring out how it was made. So it's very interesting in that regard, but it has nothing to do with, do I believe I'm an eternal being? So they say, okay, this shroud is authentic. Do I say, great, my faith must be right, it must be okay. There are people that believe Jesus didn't even exist. And what if we found out he didn't? I'm not suggesting he didn't, but what if we found out he didn't? Would that destroy your faith? That has nothing to do with my faith. I find a study of Jesus, I find a study of the scholars that are working on trying to figure out what he said as opposed to what the church was saying, the early church. That whole community was developing, the narrative they were developing around Jesus. I'm fascinated with them trying to dig out, the authentic sayings of Jesus. When you pick up a red letter edition of a Bible, those are helpful because they highlight the sayings that are attributed to him, but just keep in mind, what scholars that are in that research are saying is maybe about 1% of that red lettering would be authentic. So it's pretty interesting. But that doesn't make it any less valid. But what it helps us do is say, Jesus taught one thing, let's find out what that is. And the church taught another. And the way that I think is easiest to tell is the church is always talking about terms of futuristic terms, apocalyptic. It's going to happen. Someday it's going to happen. But you can take a saying attributed to Jesus that says, when disciples come up and say, when's the kingdom coming? He says, won't come with observation. You can't say, lo, here it is, or lo, there, because the kingdom of God is within you. Now, how does that fit in a futuristic kingdom that's coming? So you see two different concepts. You say, what is the kingdom? How does the gospel, how do the gospels define the kingdom of God? You look here, you get one definition. You look here, you get another. When you ask the question, how did Jesus define it? Then you come to these kinds of sayings, and the scholars will say this is the most likely. He was most likely talking about something that's here, but it's of a perspective that people don't get. That's Nicodemus coming up to Jesus at night and saying, Jesus says, you must be born again. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, that which is born of the spirit is spirit. I understand that. Born of the flesh is total concern with outer things, identifying ourselves by the body and all that stuff. And that's where all of our fears come from. The things that can hurt that identity. But if we're born of the Spirit, then we come to our center of power, where we realize that's being born again. There's nothing that can harm what I am at the deepest level. And for that to mean anything, it has to move from the head down to the heart. That's what Nicodemus was saying. How can a man be born again? How can he took it very literally. But to understand what this means, the full power of it, we have to, in our times of quiet, drop down into this living fountain of eternal life that is bubbling up at the heart of each one of us. And then we come out from that and we see not only the sayings of Jesus lit up, we see the sayings of the gospel writers lit up. We see them in different ways. We're able to interpret them in a way that makes sense. The kingdom is coming. The second coming becomes that awakening in ourselves, that awareness. The first coming may be when we read it in the Bible. The second coming is the awareness of the Christ within ourselves. And we begin to see it in a totally different way. But it's not lo here, lo there. It's not something that can be observed. It's subjective, and that's the difficulty with it. That's why the mystic has such a hard time speaking. That's why Jesus spoke in parables. He said the kingdom of God is like. That's a simile. It's like this. It's like that. But it's not that. It's like this. There's no language to describe it. One of the main researchers, Dr. Bruce Grayson, a near-death researcher, kind of makes light of the fact that he says, we ask people what they experienced when they had their near-death experience, and they always say that we can't put it in words. And he says, as researchers, we say, yeah, we understand that, so put it in words. We have to have words, but there are no words to describe it. And I can say that about my own experience. I can't put in words. I've been trying to for 40-some years. What I experienced, and I can't give it because it's subjective. It's not objective. If it was objective, I could show you pictures of it, write about it. You could study it and get it, but it's not that way. It has to be an inner awakening. It has to be. You have to be born from within of the Spirit, and it's one of the most frustrating aspects of this type of teaching. And I do totally understand why the Gnostics said, you've got the spark, you don't. Because appears to be true. But it's not true. It's just that we're at different levels of awareness with this. So this fear thing it's a personal thing that each one of us have to resolve. And I have not resolved it. I'm still have very much the human aspect in me that will look out at myself, and I can get a tight stomach. I can get all worried about something. But I will stop myself. But it's usually after I'm pretty thoroughly beat up. And I'll say, oh, aren't you a Unity minister? Don't you? I think I'm harder on myself than anybody is. And I hope you are too. I mean, not hard on me, of course, but hard on yourselves. Because that's always the problem. We know when we go astray. We know when we're terrorized. Didn't that book I read yesterday have any meaning at all? Doesn't that matter? So that to me is a way to look at Halloween. It's a time of year, and we can start it from this year forward. This perfect time right now to start it. Bring the thing you fear most out as well as you can define it. And say, I'm going to get where I can look at this thing and it will not bother me. And the only way you can do that is find more of yourself, the part of yourself that's larger than that. And that, again, is why the near-death research is so appealing to me, because people do that. That's what they find. They find that they are more than any problem they've ever had. But they were asleep to it. But they are all starting to say now, you don't have to have a near-death experience to come to that. You can come to it in your times of quiet meditation. So that's how I would define that. From this year on, every Halloween is going to be about getting in touch with your deepest fears. All right? And take off that mask.
You've been watching a talk presented by Reverend Doug Bottorff at Independent Unity here in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado. We would like to thank everyone who joined us here today, as well as those of you who joined us online. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel, and be sure to share it with those you think who might benefit from this message. If this brought value to your life, please consider donating to us on PayPal. Thanks again for watching.